Hello, I'm Emma Stamm, and my talk today is called Can Computation Produce Novelty? The Case of Live Coding Music. It's based on an article I have coming out in October which addresses the question of whether digital computers have the ability to produce that which is new, meaning absolutely unprecedented in both form and content. This question has compelled me for years. It drove my doctoral studies, which I recently completed, and it continues to fascinate me because I know that any answer I've given in the past is only provisional. My thoughts on this matter have been informed by case studies based on specific technological applications, as well as different intellectual and creative pursuits. The bulk of my work here so far has actually been about the use of digital methods in research on psychedelic drug effects. Now that's a good case study in digital novelty, because psychedelics tend to provoke experiences that bear no likeness to anything the subject has ever lived through before. So I'd be happy to discuss the connections between that example and the topic of my presentation today, which is live coding. The term live coding describes an approach to programming where computer functions immediately execute, often by rendering as images or sound. It's most often applied to a creative practice where musicians improvise by writing computer functions which play out loud in real time. So my talk has three parts. In the first, I establish my theoretical premises, and in the second, I read the theory into live coding as a practice. The third part situates my work in a social and political context by identifying links between aesthetics, computer science, and political theory. Before I begin, I want to apologize for not having more interesting slides, but for some multimedia effects, I set up a website which has videos of live coding performances, as well as a list of all of my references. So that link will be on all of my slides, in addition to my Twitter and Discord information. I've posed the question of whether digital computers can produce novelty, meaning that which has no identifiable precursor in form or content. This question is a bit difficult because digital data are structurally standardized insofar as they're mathematically discrete or non-continuous. They have to be discrete in order to be computable. And although digital objects combine data assemblages in various forms like content, algorithms, infrastructure, and so on, they all share the feature of comprising discrete data. So, to be computable, to be digitally computable, I should specify, is to conform to a structural prerequisite. That would seem to foreclose the possibility for computation to produce that which is new in the most fundamental sense. So some of you may detect traces of Deleuze here, and you would not be wrong. In various writings, Deleuze implied that because computing functions are mechanically standardized, they always share the same ontic character, and for that reason, they cannot be the grounds for novelty. The true nature of novelty was one of the major concerns of Deleuze's career, and I get my definition and theoretical understanding of novelty from him. In his book, Repetition and Difference, he defined the new as that which radically differs from anything known or familiar. Also, the new, in Deleuzean terms, bears infinite and unpredictable creative potential. In his words, the new calls forth forces in thought which are not the forces of recognition. He denied computers the ability to produce novelty because computation operates on discrete variables, or objects which are predetermined in the sense that they always contain a quantitatively finite array of possible values. Philosopher M. Beatrice Fazi suggests that Deleuze's conception of novelty informs his thoughts on aesthetics and creativity. She indicates that Deleuzean aesthetics follows the word's etymological roots, which lie in the ancient Greek aesthesis, or perception from senses and feelings. For Deleuze, aesthetic processes create new connections between faculties of empirical sense, feelings, and cognition, which for him are always interwoven. So it's rather Deleuzean to say that feeling is a form of thinking. In Fazi's words, Deleuzean aesthetic research opposes any existential modality that separates life, thought, and sensation. So Deleuzean aesthetics as aesthesis does not entail a theory of art, and it's not concerned with such traditional aesthetic topics as beauty, taste, and genre. Instead, it investigates the conditions which make it possible to sense, cognize, and create entirely new phenomena, or that which has no recognizable forebear. This active creation does not compute, repeat, or iterate what has come before. It yields nothing less than true novelty and difference. Deleuze's theory of creation as the generation of difference and novelty is prefigured by philosopher Henri Bergson, who did a lot of research on difference, multiplicity, and time. So Bergson argued that the state of being multiple, of comprising multiple different parts, is actually qualitative rather than quantitative. And he also said that multiplicity is constituted by qualitative incommensurability, which basically just means difference in kind as opposed to numeric degree. So qualitative properties are multiple when they cannot withstand equivocation through a common substrate. So entities and objects that comprise discrete data, including all outputs and functions of digital computation, cannot aspire to true multiplicity or difference in the Bergsonian sense. In some of his most influential work, Bergson considers the concept of time from this vantage point. So, time is normally understood as a measurable quantity, especially by mathematicians and scientists. But Bergson shows that this might be an illusion. In his view, time is a process by which continuous qualitative entities, qualitative features, sensory features, differentiate and self-actualize as unique instances, which he calls instances of pure time or duration acting in the capacity of duration, pure time or pure duration. As he puts it, the measuring of time never deals with duration as duration because what's counted is only a certain number of extremities of intervals or moments in short or virtual halts in time. So to state that an incident will occur at the end of a certain time t is just to say that one will have counted from now until then a number t of simultaneities of a certain kind. In between these simultaneities, anything you like may happen. That in-between space, where anything you like may happen, inspired Deleuze's notion of ontological continua, or entities whose quantitative limitlessness connects with their infinite aesthetic potential. For Bergson, those who believe that time is finite and measurable, quote, cannot succeed in conceiving the radically new and unforeseeable. His beliefs here appear to have influenced Deleuze. But Beatrice Fazi pushes back on Deleuze's critique. In her book, Contingent Computation, she challenges Deleuze's precept that computers can't produce the aesthetic new insofar as computation operates on discrete variables, aka digital data. So here I might mention that the alleged irreconcilability of the discrete and the continuous fuels contemporary debates in new media studies which fall beyond the scope of Deleuze. Scholars in phenomenology, critical theory, and post-Marxism have all positioned the continuousness of thought and feeling against the discreteness of computation. Fazi contributes to this discourse by establishing that the ontological character of computation is not entirely predicated on quantitatively discrete elements. Towards this end, she draws from Alan Turing's theory of computability to argue that computing processes incorporate indeterminable and uncomputable forces in open-ended functions that, quote, determine indeterminacy across time. She also references contemporary philosopher and choreography scholar Stamatia Portanova, who indicates that discrete and continuous components merge in processes that digitize bodily motion. In a similar but more expansive move, Fazi says that the discrete and the continuous coalesce in all computational operations. Although her intervention applies to all forms of computing, it casts new light on specific devices, methodologies, and human-computer interfaces. In part 2, I use her reading of Bergsonian elements in Deleuze to explore the contemporary artistic practice of live coding. So as I've said, the term live coding describes an approach to programming where computer functions immediately render as images and/or sound. Live coding interfaces typically feature two windows, one for writing source code and another which displays code outcomes, for example as graphic visualizations or audio. Although it encompasses many different activities, the phrase live coding is most often used in the context of computer music. In live coding performances, which are also known as algo raves, musicians write programs on stage in front of audiences. So the programming process might be likened to playing an instrument. Typically, the coding interface is projected on a large screen, which allows audiences to see the musical score as it develops in real time. Technologists, scholars, and educators have embraced live coding as both a creative method and an objective study. But despite its conspicuousness in educational and creative settings, scholars have rarely explored live coding in the context of improvisation studies. Programmers Gordon Krekovich and Antonio Posic claim that this is something of an oversight because improvisation is quote-unquote its most distinctive feature. In their view, live coding is most simply defined as an improvisational method whose strong emphasis on chance sets it apart from other approaches to computer music. My interest with respect to live coding lies in how its improvisational mechanisms blend computational discreteness and continuous real time. I don't mean to suggest that live coding is the only implement for improvising music with computers, because any digital instrument can be used to spontaneously play and record sound. What makes live coding unique is that it merges the act of playing with the process of writing notation, so musicians play for audiences in the very moment that they produce a written score. This process fuses the separate functions of performing, playing, seeing, hearing, and writing music in a somewhat Deleuzean act of aesthesis. Programmer Tor Magnusson writes that live coding is the, quote, offspring of two different creative practices. First is the formalization and encoding of music. Second is the open work resisting traditional forms of encoding. And by traditional forms of encoding, he means computer programs which function only insofar as source code files are static and immutable. By contrast, live coding relies on the real-time elaboration of new code. As an improvisational art, the process and product of live coding doesn't exist without continuous interventions from forces external to computation. My use of the phrase real-time evokes Bergson's concept of pure time, or duration as duration. Real-time phenomena occur instantaneously, that is, at no degree of temporal removal from those who produce and experience them. However, Bergson suggests that instantaneity is a myth. For him, there always exists some degree of removal between events as they occur and as they are perceived, even if this gap is imperceptibly small. Regardless of size, the indelible space in time has important implications for theories of improvisation. For Deleuze and Bergson, each continuous particle of time is a germinal seed for the new. Fazi uses the word contingent to describe this ever-present infinite potentiality. Deleuze might argue that only continuous phenomena are contingent, and that because they are quantitatively finite, the structures of computational media, including the sound and notation of live coding scores, can never, quote, be otherwise or contingent as such. Fazi intervenes by indicating the role of quantitative continuousness in all computing functions. Moreover, she aligns her project with emerging theories of computing which, as she says, focus less on internal mechanisms and more on external interaction, or interfaces with continuous, non-computational contexts. She takes computational interactions with external environments, such as human programmers and observers, as could the continuous directionality of composite or discrete parts. To this point, it matters that discrete objects always exist in relation to continuous environments, and that discrete objects make up continuous fluxes when mobilized as part of continuous temporal processes. This is the reason that Stamatia Portanova uses the medium of dance to explore the entanglement of discreteness and temporal contingency. As with music, the art of dance depends on the continuous unfolding of time. Fazi writes that Portanova's study of choreography reveals, quote, the unlimited potential that every numerical bit of a program or every experiential bit of a dance, every gesture and step, has to change and be something else. As with the zeros and ones of a binary computing system, the footfalls of a dance materialize as discrete parts which inhabit and constitute continuous vectors of time. Per Deleuzean aesthetics as aesthesis, these parts yield new connections between sound, space, cognition, and feeling. Aesthetics scholar Dan DePiero indicates that in the case of improvised artworks, the ontological nature of these links defies anticipation. In his words, improvisation forces artists and audiences to, quote, think contingency. As he explains, it's not that discrete, isolated entities connect themselves to form something greater, but rather that the distance between the musician as a subject and the instrument as object is not clearly defined. So, while live coder and code persist as separate phenomena, the coding/playing/performing process highlights the qualitative indeterminacy of the space between them. Each moment might beget the unrecognizable, and this ineluctable, ever-present surprise is essential in the artistic practice of live coding. Now, to be sure, there are elements of predetermination in live coding. For example, musicians often save and return to specific functions in the midst of performances. But as Krekovich and Posic point out, all modes of improvisation rely on patterning and standardization, including analog and non-computational techniques. They cite experimental composer John Cage's claim that there exists no true improvisation because artists, quote, always find themselves in routines. In a slight twist on Cage, Krekovich and Posic insist that repetition doesn't make improvisation untrue, but rather that it points to an expanded role for indeterminacy in all forms of composition. As they write, improvisation can be viewed as spontaneous composition, and when distilled to its core processes, a part of each compositional approach. Continuous and repeated improvisation can become ingrained, classified, and formalized. Or, if we reverse the flow of information, we can consider composition to be built on top of quiet, non-performative improvisations in the mind of the composer. Their commentary echoes Deleuze's thoughts on creativity and ontological continuity. To paraphrase, The aesthesis of sensing, feeling, and thinking yields quiet, non-performative improvisations that play continuously in each individual mind. Fazi's reading of Deleuze endows computable phenomena with this capacity. She doesn't endorse a computational theory of cognition that would permit computers to think and feel in the same manner as humans. Instead, she proposes a Deleuzean aesthetic capacity that is proper to computation. So, as a concluding provocation that gets away a bit from my specific case, I'm going to reflect on the relevance of Fazi's intervention to contemporary political thought. In an essay titled Digital Aesthetics, she makes reference to emerging oppositions to the mechanization of life, those are her words, from various political perspectives, with a special nod to post-Marxism. One such argument comes from philosopher Bernard Stiegler, whose theory of psychopower conceives, quote, the capture of attention by technological means as a political mechanism. Stiegler is concerned with the psychic impact of discrete technological devices. As he argues, their habitual use advances, quote, a proletarianization of the life of the mind. For Stiegler, human thought is vulnerable to processes of discretization, or the act of being made discrete, which he says leads to a loss of knowledge and quality of life. He considers this process to be a form of political hegemony. Philosopher Antoinette Rouvroy poses a related theory called algorithmic governmentality to describe the political effects of algorithmic prediction mechanisms. As she claims, predictive algorithms erode, quote, the excess of the possible on the probable, or all that cannot be accounted for in advance by statistical probabilities. In the past 5 years, Stiegler and Rouvroy have collaborated on research into the politics of technological determinacy. The same issue concerned Deleuze almost 3 decades ago. In a 1992 essay, he warns that future subjugation will proceed as technological prediction and enclosure. This dystopian society will reduce individuals to quote-unquote dividuals, or homogenized and interchangeable numeric fractions. These accounts of political power equate digital discreteness with creative, psychological, and ontological finitude, and suggest that ubiquitous computing threatens individual agency and social diversity. Stiegler and Deleuze envision a sort of digital reification of human subjectivity, whereas Rouvroy puts forth the idea that algorithmic development will reduce the possibilities inherent in social life to mere statistical likelihoods. While Fazi's work doesn't exactly discredit these notions, it might be used to scrutinize their empirical assumptions. If computation is not ontologically finite, then political allegations against it might consider that its hostility to human life has less to do with the way that computers work and more to do with how humans work, and might in fact demand a reflexive turn towards ourselves. The idea would not be to positively articulate how computers are uncreative and therefore inhuman, but instead to express the features which make human creativity non-computational. So that's my talk. Thank you so much.